let's talk about the magical way in which this all came about. You as a young man, and then you made this journey one morning to a monastery and laid down with a stone under your head. And let's go from there.
Yeah, well, there were two things actually. There were two, there was the event that you're talking about, where which I describe in the beginning of my book, where I was in Italy and in St. Benedict's grotto, where St. Benedict had his vision of his church, which became the Benedictine movement, a huge monastic movement, still very much alive today. And I wasn't particularly a Christian pilgrim or anything like that. I just happened to be there with my parents. They were, on a kind of journey exploring my uncle who was killed in the war in Italy, and we were going to his cemetery. Anyway, that's why I was there. And I was lying in that cave on where he had his head, and I just, described opening my eye, because the nuns had let me in early before anyone arrived, so I had the place to myself and for several hours. And I was lying there, and then I kind of had my eyes shut, but I saw these two eyes looking at me, really bright, and it passed through my whole body. The feeling of what was in those eyes. It was the eyes that had seen the Lord, and the eyes that knew, the eyes of a being who absolutely and 100% had cellular certainty of its divinity. And so, it was a nice moment that I capture it in the beginning of my book. But in a way, that was a kind of after tremor of an earlier experience where, I had a full-on kind of mystical awakening experience. And I know that we hear these stories from time to time.
Can you talk about that a little bit, though?
Yeah, mine was unusual in that I've not heard of another one similar in the fact that I was asleep. So I'd gone to bed the night before. I was, living in a small cottage in the south of England. I'd gone to bed the night before, and I woke up. And as I woke up into the experience. So I woke up from my sleep into awakeness. That's what I'm saying. I haven't heard of another account like that. So it's
that's not typical. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people that have had awakenings, and that's the first time I've heard that one.
But it's quite funny in a way. So I just woke up into this experience that then lasted for 3 days and 3 nights and didn't stop. And it was being in this field of light, of this intelligence, of light, of higher consciousness, I guess, and knowing my true self. And it was a really earth-shattering 3 days and 3 nights. I didn't sleep. And in a way, I was in this kind of cosmic consciousness, I guess you could say, and anything I wanted to know, I could know. I mean, it was like, wow, it was like I was like a child being given the secrets of the universe. Anything you want to know, when you're in this state, you can know it, from the past and the future, evolution, how things work, all of that. And it's communicated to you in an instantaneous, fathomless way. From the field of light, and so, and I went on a journey also in those 3 days. I kind of had a sort of clear voice in me that was taking me on this journey, and lots of amazing things happened over those 3 days. And I ended up in North Wales on a small island called Bardsey Island, very mythical place, allegedly the place where Merlin came to rest. And I sat, and I had to find a fisherman to take me out there, in a little boat, because there was no crossings or anything like that. It's a tiny little place, and he dumped me there and left me there for the day. And I sat on this little hill of the island, like a sparkling jewel in the middle of a blue sea. Was the only one on the island, and the state. I remember the state lifting, sort of falling off me. As I sat on that hilltop, it sort of started coming to a close, like it returned to the earth. It was like this shawl falling off me, and then I was returned to my kind of ordinary state. And then the fisherman came and picked me up at the end of the day. And for the next 7 years, I was literally struggling, with what had happened.
Well, how does one even begin to process 3 days of information that opened you to the cosmos and the future of humanity, and be able to articulate that into this incredible volume of work, these 64 gene keys. I wonder about how does that even happen? And those 7 years that followed, what did you do? How did you process it?
I went through lots of different phases. I'm being quite honest, I went through a very vain Messiah complex phase that lasted a few months, where I just thought I'm it. And I was aware of the psychosis, close.
It's kind of obligatory. Everyone's had an opening, seems to go through the Messiah.
So I had that Messiah bit, and then I had the denial phase that lasted like maybe a year, where I just said, I was a bit later. I just said that didn't happen. It was just, I could just get on with my life. I can't, to comprehend it. It was an illusion. I don't know why, because I didn't take anything. I was not on anything. It was just that was why I couldn't blame anything. And prior to that moment, I was never a particularly imbalanced person. I had a good childhood. Fairly privileged, and anyway,
not known to be delusional.
No. And anyway, so there was that phase, and then there was various other phases, but it slowly I started to because I didn't have a framework for it at all. I had nothing to hang it on, and my friends were growing up and having children and going on to getting jobs, and I just couldn't do those things because this thing had just stopped me, and I was on sort of pause and trying to integrate it. I didn't know what to do, and I but slowly started to integrate it. I think it took me 7 years. And in those 7 years, I traveled a lot, and I went through various systems and things which helped me piece it together. Particularly the I Ching became a very good framework, the 64 code I Ching and the system Human Design, which uses the 64. So those became like pillars, and several other things, and all the other things I'd accumulated, I guess, over my lifetime up until that point.
Did it become a process of contemplation fueled by the things you just mentioned that allowed this information to flow from you, as you say, to flow from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Human Design piece, which is, was a really important piece. Because I went to sit with Raruhu, the founder, and got to know him very well, and in his presence, I felt the same transmission that I had, and I can't explain that. I thought this guy's had the same transmission, and it was around 1987 that he had an experience, and mine was 1996, but it had the same flavor to it.
Very much so.
It was coming through him in a very different way. I hadn't sort of worked it out yet, but I recognized it. And so I sat in the back of his classes. I didn't take a single note. I never took a note. I wasn't interested in learning it particularly in that way. I just absorbed the sort of frequencies because it was still quite fresh in him, his teaching. And I'd also I'd studied with Taoist teachers in the East and things. So I had other frameworks as well that I was integrating. And I've been to India, just like, all of us on pilgrimages. So I was assimilating a lot of different things. But that was a key piece. And it was also a difficult piece because after a while, I started to feel very strangled in the language of Human Design and kind of felt myself pushed out by both literally by some of the community there who didn't like me changing the language. Although Ra was actually kind of okay with it, but we'd become quite kind of close then. But eventually I had to leave that world and carve my own path. And the transmission was very much alive in me. And then I had another opening. And it was another 3-day opening. It wasn't as intense as the first one because I think I was maturer. It was weird though, because I had, by then I got married and I had a young child. And then I had this transmission, this kind of spiritual thing in me.
Couldn't afford to lose it for 7 years.
Yeah. Well, I was literally changing nappies and kind of receiving cosmic things at the same time. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And so it was much more integrated into real life. And then I started to formulate what became the Gene Keys.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.